If you plan to move to Italy in 2023, then this is the only video that I think you need to watch. I'm about to break down to you 3 key aspects that you need to pay attention to if this is what you intend to do, as well as some common pitfalls that I recommend you avoid so that you can have a much better experience living here in Italy. I've been living here for just over 4 years and it honestly has been one of the most transformational experiences. And I want to give you this very real, raw and honest account so that it can also prove to be the same for you. So let's get into the video. So let's start by talking about the 3 aspects of life that I think that you need to pay particular attention to if you're planning to move to Italy. And they are what I refer to as the 3 C's. They are communication, connection, and culture. In my opinion, and certainly from my own personal experience, these are aspects of life that we either take for granted or we simply don't spend enough time thinking about before you actually move to Italy. Let's talk about each of them in some detail, shall we? And talk about why each of them are so important and what can happen if you don't spend enough time focusing on them. So let's start by talking about the first aspect, which is communication. Communication is hands down one of the most important aspects that unfortunately sometimes we don't pay enough attention to or enough time on before actually moving to Italy. I can talk about this from first-hand experience. This has been the one aspect that has caused me the most difficulty since living here in Italy, and it's the one aspect that I wish I had spent more time on before I moved here. I think sometimes when you have never struggled with communication before and you've never had that issue, you take it for granted that you can get by in another country even if you don't speak their language. But take it from me, it's difficult and the quality of your life will be limited and impacted by your inability to speak. I literally spent the best part of 3.5 years as a mute here, and you know, it completely stripped me of my personality, my character, like every single aspect of myself became invisible, and it was just a really horrible experience. And it's only now, where I'm like 4 and a bit years in to living here in Italy, that I can really start to understand what's going on around me and to express myself in ways that I've just never been able to do up until now. So really and truly, take it from me, super important that you begin to focus on communication before you even step foot in this country. Now, I don't believe that you necessarily need to be fluent in Italian before you start living here. I believe that language learning is a journey, and it's a journey that can vary depending on the person themselves. It's a very unique and personal experience. And so the most important aspects that I would focus on if I were you are the basics. The conversational basics that are going to enable you to navigate everyday situations in life. And from there you can start to build upon that and grow your vocabulary and learning even once you're living here in Italy. So how do you begin with the basics? I recommend utilising all of the free resources that are available on the internet. YouTube is fantastic. There are lots of Italian tutors that have free videos that you can watch that teach you basic vocabulary and conversation phrases. And also you have the internet and books as well. You can buy some visual dictionaries to help to build your vocabulary and phrase books. There are lots of different ways that you can start to study the basics of Italian, but I recommend that you begin here. I think we often believe that we need to invest immediately in a top-end course to learn the language. And whilst that can work for some people from the beginning, I think for other people it's better to wait a little bit to try to do the basics on your own, because in learning the basics yourself, you start to identify what techniques and what methods work best for you. For example, you may discover that you actually really enjoy watching videos and that engages you and helps you to learn Italian more so than reading books. Or you might discover that listening to audios in Italian really helps you to pick up new words and vocabulary more so than watching a video. So for this, if you learn the basics yourself, you start to recognise the methods and techniques that work best for you. And this can guide you and help you in choosing the best course later on if that's something you decide to invest in. So I think one thing you need to consider with language learning is that you may face some judgment around it. There are people who think that you should speak the language before you move here, and there are other people who think you should learn the language in X amount of time. Language learning, as I've said before, is a very unique and personal experience. The way a person who works 35 hours plus a week with a family learns Italian is going to be very different to the way an older person who is retired with plenty of free time on their hands is going to learn Italian. We all lead very different lives, and as a result, our language learning techniques and the time that we have available to study is going to differ as well. So please don't beat yourself up or feel bad about how long it's taking you to learn the language. The important thing is that you begin, and that you begin before you start to move here. It's one of my biggest regrets. I wish I had taken language a lot more seriously before I moved here back in 2018, because I honestly think I wouldn't have had half as many struggles as I have had, having not been able to communicate all of this time. So if there's only one thing you take away from this video, please take away the importance of focusing on communication before you start your life here in Italy. The next aspect that we're going to focus on is connection. Now, connection is something that I think can often be underestimated, and I think sometimes we think it's going to be easier to make connections than it actually really is. Now, Italy is a very particular country in the sense that connection is at the heart and soul of how it operates as a country itself. So really and truly, to get anything done in Italy, it's all about who you know and not necessarily what you know. A lot of the experiences I've had, a lot of the things that have come my way and the opportunities that I've received have been because somebody knew somebody or was able to refer me. It's always had an element of connection attached to it. So I cannot stress enough how important connection is here in Italy, but also how difficult it can be to make those connections in the first place. Italy is a country where friendships, for example, are very different compared to how they may look in other countries, certainly very different to how they look in the UK. Friendships in the UK, in my opinion, are very fluid. They ebb and they flow, they change, they evolve as people grow older and they move, to different parts of the country. Friendships are very fluid. But here in Italy, you'll find that a lot of Italians retain the same circle of friends that they had from school all the way through their adulthood. So it's very important to know this, because I think you can then start to understand that it can be quite difficult sometimes to break into these friendship circles, and it kind of prepares you a little bit better than if you come here thinking it's going to be as easy as it is to make friends in your own country, for example. But one thing I will say is that you can take some steps to make the process a little bit easier. Certainly if you're an expat, you can find groups on Facebook for not only Italy, but also different regions in Italy where expats are based. This is what changed my experience back in Salerno, because it took about a year and a bit before I really first connected with the expat group in Salerno. And honestly, when it did, boy, did my experience change. I made friends, I started to feel like I was part of a community. It completely upgraded and up-leveled my experience. So I highly recommend seeking out expat groups in the part of Italy that you're thinking of moving to, and starting to reach out and connect with those people even before you move here, because it will honestly make those early initial stages so much easier if you start to know people and you have a friendly face that you can grab a coffee with or just have a chat to about something. And also if you don't have the language difficulties as well, that can also help massively. So expat groups are definitely a must. Also reach out to people who may live in your area as well. YouTubers, have a look on YouTube for people that might live in your area, watch their videos. Fellow expats have videos in all different parts of Italy. I mean, I'm currently in Palermo, but I know there are lots of other YouTubers who live in other cities like Milan and Turin, who you can watch on this platform and learn something from, and maybe get some advice, or maybe reach out and connect with them in some way. There's lots of different avenues that you can follow. Try to be as social as you can once you start living here. If you have a particular hobby or passion or interest, see if there's a way that you can continue to do that in this country and meet new people through that. But you have to be open to new experiences. Even the simplest of actions, like especially here in the south of Italy, if you frequent the same bar often enough, or you go to a restaurant regularly, they start to get to know you and you start to build a rapport. And that essentially is how a lot of connections can be made here in Italy as well. So just be open to the experience, but just know that connection is very important here, but it's not necessarily very easy to achieve. So it's something you need to put the work and effort into yourself in order to, gain the rewards and benefits from it later on. And the third aspect is culture. Now, of course, there are going to be differences in culture depending on what country you come from, but it's really important that you open your eyes to them and you're aware of some of the biggest cultural differences that you're likely to face. I will focus on work because I think this is something that can take a lot of people by surprise, particularly when it comes to pay and working conditions. This is something that I highly recommend you do your research on. I have a playlist which I'll put up here with lots of videos about what it's like to work here in Italy, because honestly it's something that really I found quite difficult because pay is very different. The contracts you receive here are very different if they exist at all. It's quite a challenging place to work, and so I think if you can prepare yourself, you will have a much better experience and it will be less of a shock when you do live here. But also things like family as well. Family is an integral part of life here in Italy, and family units here are often very traditional. So if you come from a family that perhaps doesn't resemble a traditional, in inverted commas, family, then you might find yourself feeling like an oddity. Like my family, for example, are very different to how the families are here in Italy. We're spread out around the world, we're not particularly close. It's a very different unit compared to how families are here, where, especially in the south, they're very close and they tend to live very close to one another as well. So this is something that I think can help you a little bit. If you prepare yourself for how traditional life can be here, it can help you to feel less different when you actually start living here. And also just to understand that, you know, some parts of Italy, not all, but some parts of Italy, people can have quite closed minds. And so if you are not what they consider to be, in inverted commas, normal, like maybe, I don't know, you have a different background, you identify yourself as a different gender, you have a different sexual orientation, or you are a person of colour, maybe your experience may not always be positive. I'm not saying that this is the case everywhere in Italy. I know that there is a lot of progression in these areas in many cities, in many of the larger cities in Italy especially, but certainly in the smaller villages and the smaller towns where people tend to have more closed minds and attitudes, shall we say, you may experience certain challenges. You look different in some way, if you sound different, if you have a different lifestyle, if you're different, punto, full stop, you may find that you face some challenges. And so it's important for you to know all of this before you come here, because these are culture shocks. And even like little things like food, you may not be able to get the food that you normally and regularly eat in your country here in Italy. So these are the things that, you know, you need to pay attention to and prepare yourself for, because often a lot of the negativity that comes within expat groups on Facebook is because of these culture shocks, because either people didn't really fully understand them before, or they didn't really know about them until they started living here. So honestly, it all boils down to preparation. The more preparation you can do to prepare for life here in Italy, the better your experience will be. And if you don't prepare well enough, you are going to have a very difficult experience. And it usually falls into one of these three aspects. They are usually what cause people the most difficulty. So that's why it's so important to spend time focusing on them. Okay, so what are some pitfalls that you need to be aware of in order to have a better experience here in Italy? The first is judgment. I've touched on this before in some of the aspects that I was referring to, particularly to do with communication, but literally the moment, the second you announce your desire to move to Italy, I guarantee that you'll be faced with some form of judgment, whether it comes from people you know or from the internet. So what can you do about it? The first thing you need to do is to remember that everybody's going to have a judgment about you. It doesn't matter what you do. So you may as well live the life that you want to live, and basta, stop. Secondly, what you need to remember is that a lot of the judgment that people give to other people is based on their own personal belief system, and that is something that is very deep rooted, and often we do not have any awareness of it until we start to really focus our attention on it and understand it at a deeper level. So what is our personal belief system? Our personal belief system is pretty much how we perceive life around us, what we believe to be possible and what we don't believe to be possible. If you are a person who has been raised to believe that life is difficult, you have developed a set of beliefs within you that constantly look for the difficulties in life and the evidence that life is indeed a challenge. Whereas if you are somebody who has a more optimistic and positive belief system, you are somebody who is more likely to seek and find opportunities where others can't. So our belief systems are very personal, but unfortunately they are the basis of a lot of judgment. And so this is why you can't take judgment personally, because it's often triggered by a person's individual beliefs and thoughts about something. And judgment can be found in many places, particularly in expat groups on Facebook. They are like the source of all judgment and negativity, in my opinion. And so you need to just bear that in mind and not take anything personally, and listen to the advice that you may hear in these groups, but take all the advice that you were given, even what I'm telling you in this video, with a pinch of salt, because essentially everybody's experience of life here in Italy will be different. And you need to know that just because one person has had a really terrible experience and they want to make you feel terrible about your decision to move to Italy, it doesn't mean that you're likely to have the same. So the second pitfall that you need to be aware of is negativity. Now, in the same way that judgment appears in expat groups on Facebook, so does negativity. And I often wonder why people share their negative experiences and opinions. Like, I often wonder, is it like in a misguided attempt to help someone, or is it to make themselves feel better about something, or is it because they're triggered because the other person is doing something that they weren't able to achieve? I don't really know, but what I do know is that it exists in these Facebook groups, and you have to be really careful, because I've seen a lot of people's dreams get torn to shreds in these groups when they talk about their potential new life in Italy, quite simply because everybody jumps on the bandwagon with sharing what negative experiences they've had. Please be mindful that, as I've mentioned before with judgment, no two people's experiences will be the same. Pretty much all of the negative experiences that I've read in these groups up to date, I have never experienced, and I'm very grateful and thankful for that. But I think a lot of that is because I've had the strength of mind to know that I create my own experience here. And that is the biggest takeaway I want you to have from this video, is this: you create your own experience. And so if you want to move to Italy and you want to start a business here, or you want to set your life up here, it's totally doable. Yes, you might have some bureaucratic issues to face. Yes, I'm not saying it's going to necessarily be easy, but I'm not telling you that you can't do it, because you absolutely can do whatever you set your mind to. It's a fact. So the point of the matter is, be very aware of negativity, and, you know, literally be careful that it doesn't influence your decision. Be careful that it doesn't deter you. Be careful that you take from it what can help you and leave the rest, because I promise you the rest just simply isn't worth it. So I hope this video has helped. This video here will also tell you something else that you need to focus on, and that is your why, because single-handedly that is the next biggest thing that you need to focus on. See you in the next video.